Hello and welcome to episode 246 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, Trump assumed the presidency of the United States for the second time and once again promptly pulled out of the landmark Paris Accord on climate change. Don't worry, though, everything's fine. Just ask anyone in L.A.
Construction tools in Oslo, Norway are becoming electric, leading to much cleaner, quieter construction sites. The loudest sound in Oslo is now all the screams coming from the Edvard Munch Museum.
I research fire so you don't have to. It's not the new normal. Climate scientists ask us never to use that phrase, the new normal, because we don't know what's coming, and nothing will be stagnantly normal for many decades. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, the U.S. talking about annexing Canada, mass hysteria.
A city in Sweden has a new underground heat battery that stores heat in the summer to use in the winter. It's like a giant thermos filled with hot coffee. In fact, the Swedes love coffee, so they may as well just fill it with coffee.
All that plus a giant pile of your letters on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. Brian, I need to clarify from last week's show that Martin Short apparently did not lose his house. This is according to my own research. The media has not picked up on this.
Yeah.
It stemmed from a Selena Gomez fan account, and one outlet picked it up, and I repeated it. And I did point out who I got that information from, but Martin Short, you're fine. I have a map here. They have a map now of the Palisades and the other neighborhood as well, where you can go house by house, and they're going door to door and taking pictures of each house and marking them either black or red or yellow or green if it's unknown. And I noticed that Martin Short's house here on the map that I'm showing you, Brian, is in a cluster of houses that were undamaged. And I think he just got lucky. There's nothing about those houses. I think the embers just didn't happen to fly quite in that neighborhood. But if you go outside that maybe 2 or 3 square blocks, it's nothing but carnage. So on the one hand, Martin Short has a house, which is great. His memories, his possessions, his mementos are all there. But on the other hand, you're probably going to have a little bit of survivor's guilt in a way, and a little bit of, also the community that I loved is literally devastated. It's gone like an explosion, ripped out the whole thing.
Be very weird to go back and live in your house when so much of it is just gone around you.
For years, you're going to be driving by piles of rubble and machines. You're going to hear machines taking out the rubble. The air quality is dubious right now in a lot of neighborhoods. People aren't going back even when they can because, there's asbestos and who knows what else in the air.
Yeah, well, we complain a lot about our summer air quality, and it's from forest fires, but the smoke from burning houses, like burning civilization, is much, much more toxic. You just never know what's going to be in that.
Yeah, and I mean, you probably do know that there's a lot of plastics and things and vinyl.
Yeah, cars burning down.
You can't breathe that, and you can't breathe the residue from that. And I hate to see reporters and even firefighters without masks on when they're in that zone when it's happening, and even after it's happening. I guess we should mention the orange elephant in the room. And it's Tuesday, the first full day of the new elephant's presidency. And I'm not going to have a lot to say. I know you're not going to want to talk about it. But you have to look at the progress that we've made in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Even though he did this 8 years ago, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
And where we are now has greater momentum, a lot greater momentum than it did in 2016. I mean, you think back to 2016, I was dreaming about an electric car in the used market. Well, I could, the dealership phoned me the other day and said, we got one ready for you if you want to go look at an Equinox. And I said, no. For one, they're having a lot of problems with that Equinox the first year, which is a common thing for first model year of cars. And for another, I mean, if you wait till next year, which is what a lot of people are doing, you'll get the NACS NACS connector, the future connector that's going to be standard.
Yeah.
Right on the vehicle. Hyundai Ioniq 5 currently has that. Boy, I'd like an Ioniq 5. If one just fell out of the sky, I would take one right now. That'd be nice.
The ones with the NACS connector are coming out very, very soon. I'm not sure.
And it's going to be a weird time, Brian, because, you'd have to go to Tesla Network, which is fine. But the other networks, the third, which is half the chargers out there, are going to slowly move to the NACS connector. They'll start putting, one cable of NACS and the Tesla one, and one cable of CCS at some point, and it'll be hit and miss. And by the way, my daughter's teacher, one of her teachers, wants to buy a Nissan Leaf. He says it's on sale. I can't find a sale for that. We're in Canada. And I tried to give her a whole bunch of points about him not doing that because, for one, he wants to take it camping. I don't know how close his campground it is. It doesn't matter. It uses a fast charging connector that's going to be really hard to find.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult to find now, and it charges slow. The battery is dubious on those things, and it doesn't have the range that other vehicles have. So unless you're in the United States and you're in, like, say, Colorado, and you can lease one for $25 a month or something, and you have got a paper route and you can make those payments, then then it's a no-brainer for your second car. But it sounds like you wanted to use it for too many other things. Boy, it's been cold here. How have you been doing with your heat pump? Because it's been bloody cold. It's so cold that at least a couple people in my community, modern community here, have had frozen pipes, and I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it doesn't happen that often around here because we're all well aware, and the builders are all well aware that your pipes can freeze because everyone knows it gets down to minus 40. I know it happens in other places where you get a sort of a surprise cold snap. They've built the house to a certain standard, and then suddenly it's 10 degrees colder than normal and your pipes freeze. But yeah, usually it doesn't happen around here. It hasn't happened to me.
And it's a problem, because you don't want them to burst either. So I don't know where they say it's right where it goes into the house. So, I mean, theoretically, it should be underground. I mean, it's been minus 35 Celsius, which is really cold.
Yeah.
And I made some videos for our Patreon page and other social media, which I'm scaling back some of the more controversial social media. So find us on Patreon. There's free public posts there. Some you have to sign up for a free account. But most of all of our public stuff is going on Patreon there. Your one-stop shopping for the Clean Energy Show. And I've been doing some things.
Yeah, no, the one I liked the most was your passive solar house, which when it can be minus 35, but as long as it's sunny out, your house stays well above what you've set the temperature for with the furnace. I have a similar thing going on with my house. I do have an air source heat pump heating the house, and then it has a backup electric furnace when it gets really cold. And the house does struggle to keep it at that temperature. There's more insulation I should do in the house. But when it's sunny out, yeah, the house gets up to temperature because there's enough sun to get in just that 1 or 2 extra degrees warmer.
So there was 2 days in the mid-minus 30s where I had to turn a fan on in my bedroom office because I was too hot. I mean, we've got a big window in here, and it gets too hot, and it's like crazy. It's like, then you're not thinking that how cold it is, and if you do go outside and have to go somewhere, you realize, oh my God, it's painfully, because the wind chill was minus 50 when I made one of those videos, driving in my Leaf without heat. My wife texted me that it had gone down at 9 a.m. was the cold part of the day. It was actually hit minus 50.
Yeah.
So that's nasty. We have good news here, my personal good news, because I live close to a refinery and get it occasionally when the wind is from the east. And they were going to build a canola crushing plant there, which stinks, apparently. I've been told by many people. And maybe even, it's not necessarily dangerous. I don't know how, the odor is dangerous. I don't have any information on that. I assume it's not that dangerous compared to an actual refinery that has VOCs oozing out of it. But they canceled it. They're going to make biodiesel. And one of the reasons that a columnist wrote in the local newspaper this morning was because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Something that, unless you listen to our show, I don't think anyone in our province actually knows a dang thing about, because it is just off the radar completely. But they said it wasn't going to be competitive because they were doing other things down there with the Inflation Reduction Act. So that was 2.5 years ago, so around the time. Plus, various people got bought out. There's changes in corporate structure and stuff like that. Very thrilled to have some good news for my personal environment. And it's kind of funny because we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act because it is so important to climate change. And some of those things, of course, Trump will try to roll back. And some of the things he probably won't be able to. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about biodiesel in Oslo, which I thought was interesting. And a quick shout out to the Edvard Munch Museum, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. I went to Oslo many years ago in the 90s, and I visited the Edvard Munch Museum, the old one. But I was looking it up recently, and they've got a spiffy new Edvard Munch Museum. He, of course, did the painting, The Scream, the very famous painting, The Scream.
Something we're all feeling now.
Yeah, amazing new Edvard Munch Museum in Oslo. It's been open for a couple of years, but it's just a really interesting modern architecture. The whole building looks like it's going to fall over. It's super cool.
Okay.
The whole thing is kind of tilted and slanted.
All right.
A quick shout out to our friend Barry, who we mention occasionally. Barry has an apartment in LA, and he was able to share some stories. He was not in LA at the time of his fires, but his daughter was staying in his apartment for a little while. So he sent me a picture from his apartment window in LA of the fires off in the distance. So his apartment was spared. It was kind of in the danger zone for a while there. But of course, huge devastation. A person I don't know that well, but a person who did wardrobe on one of my short films, she lives in LA and lost her house down there in the Palisades.
Jesus. Yeah. It's amazing that we are this far away and have connections to people. That's how bad it is. I mean, I can't imagine for LA residents how bad it would be.
When Barry first started going to LA, he would stay in the guest house of a friend who's a director, and that house burned to the ground.
You're kidding me.
This is very real stuff going on.
Wow. That's awful.
This fire has been called catastrophic, it's been called explosive, and tonight it's pushed us and many others out of Fort McMurray. The fire, which has already caused so much devastation, particularly in the city's southwest, continued to grow. Crews even hosed down the fire station and command center on the edge of the city, trying to prevent more destruction. This is the entranceway to Beacon Hill. It's on the west side of Highway 63, and it was one of the hardest hit neighborhoods. 80% of the homes here were destroyed.
This is a passage from Fire Weather, The Making of a Beast by John Vaillant. Welsh explained, fire can alter the nature of things so completely that they are transformed from objects in space to moments in time. Few people on Earth has seen what Welsh and his crew saw that day and lived to tell about it, much less articulate it as he has. We avoided heat, Welsh explained to me, is a different type of firefighting. If one house is on fire, you're going to go in there and try to put that fire out. We didn't go into any houses. There was no time. There was one point where we were looking at a house, an entire house was disappearing in 5 minutes. I asked Welsh what he meant by disappear. His answer was unambiguous, fully there, totally normal to fully gone in 5 minutes. That sounds physically impossible, I said. It does, agreed Welsh. You throw wood on a campfire and you can sit around that for an hour before it's gone to just coals. These houses were disappearing in 5 minutes. I did actually get a copy of Fire Weather from The Making of a Beast by John Vaillant from Vancouver, Canada. Did get a copy of it. I'm reading it, and it's a page-turner. It's kind of like an action movie in some respects. There's a section of the book where, one of the main fire people went after a press conference on the day of the fire onto a radio show between 12 and 12:30. He was there the whole time talking about it. And the whole time he's saying, everything's fine. No, we got it under control. Meanwhile, he's starting to sweat more and more, and he's looking out the window, and he can actually see the flames coming closer and closer to downtown. And it's quite a thing. And it seems like, the oil industry had something to do with this, not just for climate change, but just because of the culture there. And I also have the excellent book, Ducks, the graphic novel by Kate Beaton.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm full of books and didn't wait for the audiobook.
Well, fortunately, Ducks has a lot of pictures, so
it does have a lot of pictures. So it's got just as long in pages, but it's got a lot of pictures. So hopefully I'll get through that. But I'm very interested now in oil sands culture and wanting to know more about that. There's one thing that is mentioned in the book, and then remember that this book starts out about the Fort McMurray, Alberta fire, which happened in 2016. It was a wildfire on May 3rd, but it started on May 1st, and normally, there's chunks of ice the size of cars in the creek still, and the ground is frozen, the roots are frozen, the surface is thawed and they're exposed to sunlight because there's no leaves. So it's this special time of the year where they can get dried out easily before the leaves come. And it was a heat wave that was several degrees above a record. And it was in the 30s, Celsius, which is like 90 degrees in 10 degrees south of the Arctic Circle. It was in a forest that's usually wet. So this was really weird. And this fire came up on the city very quickly. And they were not prepared. They were in denial. The firefighters there had hardly ever put out a house fire. It was just, the city's so new and everyone's rich. There's not a poor area of town where there's people with addictions starting fires and things like that. They didn't even know how to deal with it. And boy, they had a lesson that day, and they're all probably PTSD'd into submission. But everyone got out of that city of nearly 100,000 people, including the temporary workers, which the author points out should be a case study because of how, that actually happened. And there was only one road out of town, a double highway that got congested, and the flames were literally on the highway cooking people practically. Some radio stations, and I noticed this in Hawaii too, because I started watching some videos of people escaping the Hawaii fire, which was very similar in, I guess, 18 months ago in August of 23.
Yeah.
It came very quickly and there was high winds and it was very dry. The radio stations, the people are escaping and trying to tune into radio stations as they make these videos, and they're playing like happy Hawaiian music. And they're saying, what the hell's going on? The city is literally burning and you're playing music. Have you fled? Radio stations were not all picking it up. And the ones that were kind of saying, well, I guess, this neighborhood should evacuate. And it's amazing thousands of people didn't die. It really is. And it has something to do with how rich they are. And by the way, they're so rich that people have porches in their garage. There's many cars in people's garages there. So you flee in one car and the other ones blow up during the fire. So that's how they knew the fire was coming towards them. The firefighters couldn't see anything, but they would hear, okay, boom, that car went. Those tires went, boom, the car went.
Boom.
And then, and then it would happen in another street, and then they would know it's getting closer every time those noises happened. But yeah, oil culture, everything's fine and we're strong, had something to do with that. And even though they practice safety a lot in the oil sands, and any oil work that's done safety is supposed to be very important. It doesn't always turn out that way, of course. So they could be accountable to the oil industry interests, which, could have shut down. They were scared that we would offend the oil interests by shutting down the mines, the oil sands, and be wrong. So if we're wrong, they're going to send us or our family out of town. So it was kind of a scary thing. So, but again, in Los Angeles, a lot of bad things have happened. Obviously, Martin Short's house is fine for what it's worth. A lot of people's aren't. Conan O'Brien, have you ever listened to his podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend?
Yeah, occasionally.
Well, his assistant, Sona Mosesian, lost her house.
We've all had our own experiences, but really we have to start by acknowledging that, Sona, you lost your house.
Yeah.
And there,
I thought I would last longer before I started crying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, listen, this is the...
I really thought I was like, keep it together.
Well, you don't have to keep it together.
Yeah, and his other person, Matt Gorley, who's on the show, his audio engineer, he was evacuated, but he's not bringing his family back because he says the air quality is dubious. People are wearing masks. You got to have a good mask if you're going back to areas like that. And if you lived in a wildfire zone, I think I would, and you could, if you were able to, invest in a good carbon air filter mask for fleeing such a thing, because there's always congestion getting out. Bloomberg today has a story. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass issued an executive order on Monday to ease rebuilding nearly 3,000 houses destroyed by the Pacific Palisades fire. That's the area that we described that Marty Short lives in. The order suspends an ordinance that would have required replacement homes to be all electric, which saddens me because that adds money to the cost of the house is the idea. And it would greatly reduce the use of natural gas in high-risk fire zones, which seems like an idea. I mean, a lot of these people were rich, so you don't think that if you can afford a home there, modest or immodest, what's an extra expense for electricity heating and electricity stove? Come on. You don't want that.
So the
natural
idea
gas.
being that there were regulations in place that new homes would have to be all electric, but because that might cost more, that has been eased. So it's supposed to be a helpful thing, but no, one would think that
you would
the
learn your
building
lesson
codes-
from a climate
Yeah.
event like this and maybe suck it up. That's what I have to say. I had 2 cups of coffee this morning, so look out. Look out.
No, and I went down a little bit of that rabbit hole that you went down last week of, videos on YouTube about fire prevention and how to build a house and, hopefully more of those kinds of things. It's not a guarantee that your house won't get burned down, but if this is rebuilt to newer, better standards, that would obviously help.
I know I saw a clip on the news this morning. There was an architect who had designed fire-resistant houses in the burn zone, and 8 of 9 of them survived. Not all of them, but most of them did. So it's not a guarantee. And some of those things maybe be able to be helped. But I'm quite fascinated by this. So I hope that you now have an understanding when I talk about this later in the show, that you'll actually know what I'm talking about and we'll connect on this. So if a gas line inside the house, this is back to the LA mayor, connected to an appliance breaks, that could intensify a particular structure fire, according to Professor Sandra Barbara's wildfire resilience outfit. Initiative replacement houses in Pacific Palisades can be a maximum of 10% larger. So some people might be tempted to make them things big, but they're making it only 10% under the mayor's order. New building regulations will have to be abided by. The mandate that houses be clad in fire-resistant materials. This is new regulations that not just out now, but have been out. So when you build something, this is what you have to do. You just clad in fire-resistant materials, no vinyl siding for one, or wood shingles. Window glass will be tempered, which is important, I've discovered in my fire resilience education, and screens installed over vents, which, by the way, I said last week that it was a 1/4 inch. It's actually an 1/8 inch. So it has to be no bigger than an 1/8 of an inch opening in your screen, which is much like a window screen that you have in your window.
Yeah. So if you have a vented attic, which most of them are, embers can get in the attic. So often these houses burn down from the inside. But another thing about building fire-resistant homes is maybe you don't have an attic. Maybe it's a vaulted ceiling.
Yeah.
We don't need attics, really, I don't think, in most cases. So.
Well, I've been fascinated by going through these maps that I showed you where there's like a burn zone of all these red houses, but then there's a black one. So I click on the black one to see. I can't click on the red ones because they're nothing but dust. But if I click on the black one, I can see what kind of a house it is. A lot of them have flat roofs or vaulted ceilings. Now, that's just my non-scientific observation, but I'm kind of curious about that because there did seem to be a lot, and I know that not all homes were built that way. Also, getting back to the mayor, decks, fences, and stairs must also be fire resistant. Yeah, fences. That's a big thing. All our homes are connected by a wooden fence here, and I said last week, if we had a grass fire here, and grass fires burn very fast and started the fences, that would start the homes. If you weren't on top of it, if you didn't, I would grab a hammer and dismantle certain parts of my fences that connect to the house, but they always say, open the gate. A metal gate would be better, but I've got this pool and I've also got this need to block very high winds in my backyard, which is now very effectively done by my wooden fence.
Yeah, you want to keep anything flammable away from your house. And I heard one person mention that, if you got a wooden rake that's leaning against the house, even that could be enough.
I've heard brooms like what do you call those, cornstalk brooms and things like that. There's actual video of those things going up. And by the way, where the debris and leaves gather, that's where the ambers gather because the wind blows them in that way and traps them in the same way.
Yeah.
So decks and fences, and I'll talk more about decks later. Building a state-of-the-art fire-resistant home could cost $53,000 more for the average home in California. Now, if the Palisades average cost was $3 million or more, $53,000 to guarantee your home may not burn down again, isn't crazy on the surface. I mean, it seems like a good idea.
But of course, they're not all $1 million mansions either.
No. The number of contractors that know how to rebuild in a more resilient way, however, Brian, is only 1% to 2%, according to a person quoted in the article, which I have linked. So, you know what? Aluminum melts at 1,220 degrees Fahrenheit, or around 600 Celsius. And there's lots of videos out there of hubcaps melted. Did you see any of those pictures or videos? And bikes melted to dust. Like there's a picture that I put on our Patreon of a bike or on our Instagram too, of a bike, completely dust. You can see it's like an archaeological find. Like it's just incredible. So on every block, cars and trucks were burning to the chassis, deforming the way bottles do in campfires, while their wheel rims bled aluminum and many-fingered streams. That's a quote from my book that I'm reading, and that was in Fort McMurray. But the same thing happened in Los Angeles. It got very, very hot because it was very dry and the wind fanned the flames. So it's estimated the Palisades fire burned at over 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, yeah, fire-resistant home or not, you're in trouble if that happens. So I'm fascinated by those houses that have been standing, and I want to know more. Partly because I know that this is coming for us all. Many people, I think up to 60% of people, live in wildland urban interfaces, or WUI, as the fire people call it, in Canada and the United States. That is a lot of our population. And this author thinks that Calgary, Vancouver, Vancouver is wet, right? But you get one of those heat domes that burnt down that town, Linton, in interior BC, that lasted, the record temperature. The next day, the town is dust, literally, the whole town.
Yeah.
A lot of flat roofed or vaulted ceilings, like I said. But, decks don't burn that easily. Like you could start a fire on your wooden deck, and it probably wouldn't start on fire. Because, if you took a 2x4 and a Bic lighter, you would have a hard time lighting that sucker. You'd have to hold it there for a very, very long time. And the thing is, the way fire burns is it's not something that really burns. It's the gases that burn. So you have to heat it until the gases come out of the object. And then that is what burns. So that's why you use kindling. And kindling is something that also just gathers around people's homes. If you're starting a campfire, you start with little twigs and things. And those are the things that can collect on your roof and gather and be ignited by embers, which we said last week can travel. I think it's up to 2 miles, they're saying now, that embers can travel in those conditions, which is a distance. So residue next to the house between deck boards, I learned, on decks, I'm fascinated by deck safety, because how do you protect a home? Every home has a deck, right? I mean, you're going to have a deck at your cottage, right? I assume.
Looking like no, but go ahead.
Really? I'd like to know more about that. Why wouldn't you have a deck in the cottage?
There's going to be a patio between the house and the garage, so that's likely going to be our kind
of a ground-based patio. Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's got to be fire safe then if it's a cement patio, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's not the deck boards that burn necessarily. It's actually, the space between the boards where they go over the joist. The joist is what holds up the deck boards. It's like joists on a house. And now those little 1.5-inch spaces, debris can gather, from pine needles or whatever, stuff that gets blown around. And that's what starts. That's the kindling that starts the fire. Then the house goes down. So you have to protect any wooden stairs or a deck that connects to your house. So, yeah, I am still trying to get over that Barry story you told. It's quite remarkable. Anyway, metal decking is a possibility, apparently, if it's a solution. But also putting one metal deck board right at the house. Like a lot of decks will have the deck boards run parallel to the house. So you could just unscrew that deck board next to the house, replace it with a metal one. Sometimes they have like a grate on it to let water through, and doesn't look that unstylish. So you can do that. That's one thing to create it. But also where the deck joins the house, putting flashing in there, or flashing even over the joist, which is metal thin aluminum that you can put over to protect wood. That is another option, is to keep the exposed places like that. So you got to clean up. There's an interesting story about the Maui Lahaina fire. There was one house that was kept standing there in the middle of a disaster zone, and people asked, what happened there? And the guy said, I had a termite problem. So I cleaned up everything. I got rid of all the brush and all the twigs and all the debris, and it was super clean because I was trying to get rid of the damn termites. And his house survived for that very reason. So, that's a very interesting story. Yeah, and I've been kind of fascinated by the Lahaina fire, which was 18 months ago now. Roads clogged up. I was watching people trying to escape. It was just It's remarkable what you can watch on YouTube now.
Yeah.
And it seems like a pretty benign thing at first. They're just rolling, something's going on, I should check it out. Next thing you know, it's a disaster movie, and they're running literally for their lives. It's incredible. And that fire moved so fast. I wondered, the ingredients of fire that we're talking about, this fire weather phenomenon, is very low humidity is one of the main aspects of it. Of course, warm weather and high winds and drought. The vegetation has to be dry. But I thought, Hawaii, Maui, there's no way that the humidity was that low.
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and there's a report on it, and the nearest by weather station had 5% humidity.
Wow.
I mean, I live in the dry prairies of Canada. I've never seen that. I'm sure it's maybe happened, but I've never seen it. That's the humidity of your oven without food in it. It's unheard of. It's just crazy that they would have that low humidity. And of course, there was a hurricane that had gone all the way from the Atlantic Ocean, but it was influencing the weather in Hawaii. It was causing these high winds that were coming down from the mountains, just like in California did. Because when they come down from the mountains, they pick up speed. They're like sticking your finger at the end of a garden hose and making the pressure go higher. It's getting drier and hotter when it does that. The hurricane caused those fires, because the winds were hard. It's like the old story of a high pressure and a low pressure. Abandoned agriculture and foreign grasses. People brought in foreign grasses that sort of took over abandoned agriculture land, which was sort of abandoned in the mid-2010s. And drought happened, and then the winds going down the slopes and picking up speed and temperatures. So that was weird. The author of the book warns, though, that other places will, eventually face something like this. So we have to be ready, and we need to learn the lesson. So I was, the wedding I went to was very much in a forest on the outskirts of Calgary. And, if there was a fire that rode through there, that would be bad. So yeah, I worry about that. And Lytton, BC, the town that I was talking about, the interior of BC, reached 49.6 Celsius. That is 121.3 Fahrenheit in 2021, and promptly burned to dust. And I remember covering that story on the show. I think one week we had the forecast, and we thought, if that ever turned out, that would be bad. And it did, and holy crap, next week it was gone. So it was Canada's hottest recorded temperature, broke the record by several degrees, many degrees Fahrenheit. I want to leave on this note. Even though most survived, a lot of people will be left with scars, as you can imagine. This is Conan O'Brien and Sona Mosesian on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend podcast. This is Sona, his longtime assistant, and now also co-host of the podcast. And she did lose her house.
But there's going to be a point where I have to go see someone, because I think I legit, every time I hear wind, I tense up, and it's really nerve-wracking.
There's no way. I mean, so many people are going to have some form of PTSD or however you want to classify it from this.
Yeah.
And
just hearing wind, that really struck me, like the wind.
Yeah.
Because I hear wind all the time. I heard it yesterday, and it caused a wind chill of -50. This is from Bloomberg. The last several years, scientists have been debating whether Santa Ana winds will grow stronger or weaker. Remember, these are the winds that affect California this time of year and drove those fires. And even as we speak now, they are there again on Tuesday afternoon. More frequent or less rare. This is what they are debating as the world warms. They're not sure. While some research has shown that these winds will become less common, the dry conditions that prime Southern California for blazes are expected to linger later in the season, colliding with the peak time of year for the Santa Ana. So, I don't know. Whether you are in California, Hawaii, Australia, or the boreal forests of Canada, I would be keeping my eye on the humidity. That's what I'm going to be doing from now on, and thinking about my own home.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where we live is at, a greater risk. I feel like we should be a little bit safer than Vancouver or Calgary. But I know we've certainly in the last couple of summers had very long periods without any rain. And it just, if it gets too dry, we're all in danger.
Now, I think that with a very dry humidity and high winds, a grass fire that, could, go down the corridor that's behind my house quite easily. So, hopefully it won't happen when I'm gone.
Okay, we're going to move to Oslo here. This is from The Guardian. Sites without sound. Oslo leads in quiet, low-emission electric construction. So, in the capital, construction sites here in Oslo were 98% free of fossil fuels last year, and they're planning to increase the use of electric machinery. So the caveat here is that they are using some biodiesel. So they have a mandate to get rid of fossil fuels in construction sites and eventually, closer to 100% electric. But in the meantime, they're allowing biodiesel to power some of the machinery, which I just thought was interesting because, as we know, Norway is a huge fossil fuel producing country, but even they are making rules and regulations to use renewable diesel rather than fossil diesel, which is an improvement, but obviously going fully electric is the plan. So this mandate takes effect, or it took effect on January 1st. There's a quote here: "I don't think we'll get to 100% because not all electric machines are yet available on the market. And in fact, they've had to do a lot of kind of testing of construction equipment. Companies that make this kind of equipment, they've been giving that stuff to people in Oslo first, and they can use it and work on it and maybe give some feedback about what works or doesn't work." So 2/3 of construction was electric and about 1/3 biodiesel. And they're going to try and, make that better. And of course, one of the great byproducts of this is that it's way quieter,
Yeah, it's one of those things that, buses and other things that, even climate change aside, why not go this route? Because there are other benefits.
Yeah, electric buses, way more quiet and pleasant to be around than diesel buses. So yeah, this is an interesting thing. There's a little bit of pushback from the building industry because, they're suggesting that, well, maybe this is moving a bit too fast and there obviously isn't all the solutions available now. But of course it's coming. And, it mentions here that, if there's a school nearby, a construction site, they can continue on working all day long and not really interrupt the school with all of the noise.
That's fantastic. I love that. Norway leading the way again.
Yeah.
So let's get into the mailbag now, because it's a thick bag this week, Brian. It's heavy. It's weighty. This says, "Hi, Brian and James. Happy New Year from Ireland." Happy New Year, Ireland. My daughter would love to be a voice actor, and she knows I love the Clean Energy Show. So it would make us both happy if you could use her voice in your show sometimes. Regards, Sean in Ireland. And we have a clip here of his daughter's audition, I guess, for the show.
Welcome to the Clean Energy Show.
Yeah. Now, if that
Very
sounded
nice.
like Brian, if you could impersonate Brian, get her to start impersonating Brian, because some days he probably would rather have a nap than do the show, take a day off, or just do a half show or something. Yeah. So thank you. We're currently not hiring. I want to make that clear.
Another letter here. "Hi, James. On the most recent podcast, love the show. You mentioned your Tesla adapter for your Bolt and potentially using it at the Davidson, Saskatchewan charger. I had the same hope for my Bolt EUV trips between Regina and Saskatoon. Unfortunately, I've discovered that the Tesla chargers in Davidson are the version 2 Tesla chargers, which means they do not support the CCS protocol, so the adapter doesn't work. You have found that that's not technically true. They are version 3 chargers.
Yes, they are.
But for some reason...
Now, you've charged there. They go to 250, right? So you know full well that they're V3. That's how you know. Otherwise, they'd be 150 max. So, yeah, they are V3s. Not all V3s have been authorized for use of third party. Most of them have. But for some reason, they're holding these back.
Yeah, and as I recall, that was probably the first one. I don't know if this makes a difference, but that was
maybe it's an
probably
early
the first
iteration of the V3s.
Yeah, of the V3. So it could be a technical limitation, or because it's such an important stop, they don't want to open it up just yet. Anyway, the letter continues. Only version 3 chargers will work. I've used the A2Z adapter successfully in these locations, but it failed in Davidson. I doubt the chargers in Davidson will get updated anytime soon, so I think we're stuck with the flow chargers that are at that location.
Yeah, so I did actually get my A2Z adapter in the mail. It took a long time. Usually people were getting them the next day. Mine took 10 days because they had this big discount, 25% off for Boxing Week. But I finally got it, and I ordered the wrong one at first, but they were able to cancel that, thankfully. And I used it, which was a weird experience going to a Tesla supercharger, because it was very cold out, and as there was 4 Teslas charging on a 6 charger stall at one point, And so I went to the very end one where I could, because the way the charging hatch is on non-Teslas is the wrong way. So you ended up taking up 2 stalls. Well,
often, yeah.
In this way, I was able to not take up 2 stalls, but the way I could park on just outside the Tesla charger. But that damn thing didn't work. But it took me a long time in very, very cold weather trying to make a video for a Patreon page, and it did not work. And then I get home. Well, I did get it to work on the next one over, so it was perfectly fine. It's a little weird using an adapter, but it's weird. It's fine.
No, and I will say, too, that it's only when it's super, super cold have I ever had an issue with the Tesla superchargers. And sometimes it's just a physical thing of when it's cold, of just physically fitting it in the plug. And like we have a charger, one of our chargers here at home is not a Tesla charger. And so we do use an adapter for it. It's like a J17 whatever. And yeah, just on a very cold day, sometimes you have to spend an extra minute just jamming it in there because everything's so cold and it doesn't quite fit. And
yeah, and I had a bit of snow in my port too. That was a bit tricky. So I had to get like a pen and start digging out snow in the little crevices.
Stick a knife into the electrical sockets.
Yeah, that's always good, isn't it? So yeah, that was weird, but it's doubled my chargers. If you have an adapter, then Tesla has practically half the chargers in North America, so you can double your options and have backups. And yeah, and I'm thinking Tesla's pretty expensive, but a lot of times they charge by the kilowatt hour, which benefits me because my car charges slow. If I take an hour to charge, that would cost a lot if you charge by the minute, but if you charge by the measly amount of electricity I got, then that's better. And I'm thinking if, my son's out in BC, so that's a 2-day trip. And I'm thinking I'm probably going to be making a trip out there again. And I already did that once, but if I just put in buy the membership for Tesla, which you can do for $17 Canadian, it's less in America, you get it at a reduced rate. But you can also just cancel it after the month is over. So at the one time that I go there, I might just have that membership and just use Tesla. I haven't figured it out completely yet to see if this is the best way. But because there's so many more stalls, like if I go to a city like Swift Current, there's 2 stalls. Like, is one broken? Are they both used? I don't know. Sometimes there's only 1 stall. I went to Medicine Hat. There was only 1, and it's like I have to drive across the city. You don't want to do that. So if you go to the Tesla, you can have more options and not worry about it as much.
Yeah, not waste time having to, fiddle around and go somewhere else, perhaps.
Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. But yeah, hopefully that Davidson charger that our writer speaks about is, going to maybe update, like it's going to be important anyway. So maybe they'll expand it someday with some new chargers or upgrade 1 or 2 of the chargers, and hopefully. And if they do, ironically though, if they do upgrade, it'll probably be V4, which you won't even need an adapter for, right? It'll have it built in, which they are able to do on those new ones anyway. So there's another letter. Sean wrote on our Patreon page about the LA fires. He said, I hope this is the event that will make people realize the world needs more action and accountability on climate change, but I won't hold my breath. But Timo replied, the floodings caused by extreme rainfalls in Germany had a huge impact on the last elections there. So yeah, I feel the same way. I'm kind of skeptical. I mean, I don't know what it takes for people to wake up. There's this dissonance between reality with some people these days.
Public opinion at large is always very, very slow to change, and that's just always going to be the case. It's something you learn when you've been around as long as we have.
Weldon wrote on our Patreon page about this video I posted about driving my electric car, my old one, without a working heater in the winter, in the frigid subarctic winters of Virginia. He says, I had a 1969 VW Beetle with the exact same winter heating issues. I used to drive around and scrape the inside of the windows and drive with the window a little bit open to stop it from fogging up. Good memories and good times. Really? Are those good memories? Really? Because I'm not feeling like these are good memories now.
Yes. No, and I feel like we maybe even talked about this before, but I had a friend with a very old Volkswagen Beetle, and of course they're air-cooled engines. The engine's in the back and it's air-cooled. So they don't have a natural way to heat up. So a lot of them had a propane heater, which just seems insane that we'd have a separate propane heater in the car. But I think by the time I rode in it, and by the time a lot of people rode in these old Volkswagen Beetles, they didn't bother to keep those propane heaters. So I have definitely driven around in an old Beetle scraping the inside of the window.
Okay. Randy also wrote us.
Yes, you might have already seen this and had it referred to you a bunch of times. Saw this on YouTube from your own backyard and was pretty impressed. The headline, new electric vehicle battery could run for 8 million kilometers. A battery material called single crystal electrode can last decades and be used in second life applications, such as storing wind and solar energy for the electrical grid. So these kinds of stories are fairly common. Everyone's always working on these multi-million-dollar batteries, and progress is always being made. It's important to remember batteries are good enough now. Mm-hmm. It's just they're going to get better from this point, and whether or not this becomes practical and actually manufacturable at a reasonable price, remains to be seen. But it's always getting better.
Yeah, and we're getting a lot of press releases almost by the hour now and stuff like this. And I did see that story, and it was interesting. But when I looked into it, it's like, you're going to put an 8 million kilometer battery in a car. And then after maybe 1 million kilometers, take it out, and it's going to be good for a second use if you do that. Well, that's fine if all batteries are 8 million kilometers, but if it's cheaper to not have an 8 million kilometer, then it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Yeah. Where it does make sense, of course, is battery storage, because the longer they last in a battery storage facility for the grid, the cheaper the, per unit of electricity that it gives out is, and that becomes a very, very good situation.
Yeah, different batteries for different purposes. Probably save the 8 million kilometer batteries for storage. 1 million kilometers is probably enough.
Maybe two for a robo-taxi, but I mean, the thing's going to get worn out. You're going to have to replace the interior, and maybe you will. Yeah. I don't know. That seems like an option.
Cars, don't typically last that long.
Ian on the west coast of Canada writes, I'm going to answer some of your questions, Ian, as I read your letter. It says, hi, Brian and James. I'm just going to comment. Usually I just comment to Brian, but I think these are more James's topics. And yes, they are. I'm starting to understand the issues surrounding infrastructure on the non-Tesla side and commiserate with James on his road trips and the tech that does and doesn't work. I bought my 2017 Bolt. Is that the first year, Brian, that the Bolt came out? I think it was.
I think so, yeah.
2 months ago, he bought a used 2017 Bolt. Oh, and Vancouver Island is like the best place in Canada to buy a used EV. Yeah. I envy you. 2 months ago, I bought it, and it's great for errands. No complaints as a car. I was going to leave it here on Vancouver Island, because you have to take a ferry to leave the island, and never take it to the prairies. But now I find myself needing to get back to where you guys are here in Regina. Like I said, that is a 2-day trip, and I'm debating whether to try a winter road trip as my first EV road trip. Yeah. Now keep in mind, minus 50 wind chill yesterday. This guy wants to take his 2017 Bolt across the country, across the prairies. I have read about the range hit due to cold. Have you? Have you really? Because I don't think you have, or you wouldn't be writing this letter. I've downloaded PlugShare. Good for you. Everyone should download PlugShare. It's an app. If you have a car, you can see people's comments on how the latest plugs are working. If you're going somewhere, you'll know if it's working or not, hopefully. And now I have a bunch of charging apps. Yes, we all do. The nice thing about, the recent announcement that there's going to be a charging standard for going back and forth. Plug and charge. Yeah, I love that. And I can't wait for that because I don't have that. Some people have that on the Tesla network. All they have to do is plug in, not me, because Chevy, for some reason, isn't doing that. They are on the Flow network and other networks like ChargePoint, which is interesting. There's now a high-speed charge point in Fort Qu'Appelle, which I found interesting. That's a different, level 3 charging network coming our way. I'm actually most concerned about my cell phone as being the weak link in the system. Yeah, the only time I had a problem with a cell phone with charging was at a hotel parkade where it was, really covered in concrete and I couldn't get a connection. So I went up to my room and just enabled it from there because it's level 2. It's not like a level 3 that you have to worry about something like that.
Yeah, so often you need your phone to enable the charger, but if you don't get a cell signal, you're out of luck. But I guess you plugged it in, went up to your hotel room, and then were able to initiate it.
And you could do that there. There was no time limit, although I was worried that it wasn't going to work. There was a website you went to and entered your credit card information, and it's weird. There's some weird things out there like that. But that's the only problem I ever had so far. And, like I say, nowadays I'm using plug and charge, so only the charger needs to have an internet connection. I don't even worry about things. So he says, I was just at a free flow charger. I take it that was level 2 at my supermarket, like a lower speed charging. only 5 minutes from my house, and Rogers let me down. That's a cell phone network in Canada, one of the two big ones.
Yeah.
My phone had 1 bar and kept dropping data, and I was barely able to connect to the Flow app. Okay, I've got a solution for you, Ian, and that is the Flow card. It is like a credit card that they'll send you, and I did this before I even had an electric car that could charge in level 3. I signed up and had them send one out to me. It's $20 Canadian. It's a bit pricey for a piece of plastic, but it's got, you can initiate you with, it uses your account, whatever money you have in your account for Flow, you just tap it. People are using that as a backup.
Yeah.
So you won't need it. And you could probably do that with the RFID on your phone, but he said he didn't hook all that stuff up on his new phone anyway. Yeah. So do that. If you're in Canada and you are charging on third-party networks that are not Tesla, order that Flow card. It is a backup. Have it with you, and when you're traveling, and it will get you out of any nasty situation should they come up. Although with plug and charge, I don't expect that to come up, but I didn't always have plug and charge. Yeah, set it up on your Chevy app. I've got instructions on our YouTube channel. Go there. Go to the Clean Energy Show YouTube channel and look at that video. Yeah, that's only for level 3. It doesn't work on level 2. Like Flow is not connected. Their level 2s are not connected, which is a shame, but maybe one day they will be. The charger at the community center, he writes, was unusable because my new phone did not have Apple Pay wallet set up. Wow. Do that.
Yeah.
It's the modern world, Ian. Get on that. The Shell recharge I tried last worked with the Flow app, but the guy next to me was using the Shell app and it didn't work. Yeah, Shell's terrible. They're terrible. Like at the co-op stores around here, we're using Shell. They got out of Shell and they're using their own deal now, or they're using Flow, which actually works. So, yeah. He says, I have a Tesla adapter coming in the mail, so I will need to try that one before I go. Make sure that when you search for a Tesla place, that it will tell you that it is available. You can do that on the Tesla app. You can do that on the My Chevy app. You're looking for a place to charge. You have to set that up on your My Chevy app to work with Tesla.
Yeah, so if it's one of those chargers that doesn't support non-Tesla cars, that should tell you.
Yeah, it won't show up in the app if it doesn't, so it won't be a surprise to you. So he says, all this beta testing is so important for a new EV user. Unfortunately, it is, and that's why I think the plug and charge will make it so much easier. He says, I'm very keen to try this trip, but it's going to be an adventure. Yeah, it will. It really will. Possibly involving you dying. And I'm expecting to add at least 1 day to the trip for my usual internal combustion engine 2 days. And yeah, I did my trip in 2 days, but he's thinking because of winter, I'll add an extra day. Fine. Yeah. I understand your ambition, Ian. Like, I admire it and I identify with it. And it breaks my heart to say this, but I don't think you should do it because, a 2017 Bolt is going to have battery degradation. It might only have 85% of its range, and its range is less than mine.
Yeah.
Then you factor in cold weather. Maybe you've got winter tires if you're in BC. I think you have to. So with the BC interior. So I don't know. He concludes by saying, thanks for the podcast, guys. Your California fires coverage was excellent and timely. Cheers, Ian. So yeah, it's easy to go between where you are and say Calgary. There's charger on everywhere you look. You can't swing a cat. But after Calgary, it gets dubious. I don't even know if it's possible. Okay. Like, I plugged it in and I could do it, but there's some long trips here between Moose Jaw and Swift Current, 280 kilometers or something. In winter, you may not make that. But here's...
Yeah, if there's nothing in between, I wouldn't do that.
Here's the solution, though. If you do it, and I hope you don't, because I think it's a mistake, and I would sully your vision on EVs. It's wonderful in summer. I highly recommend it, even in a Bolt in summer. But if you do decide to go, watch my video on a better route planner, Pro, not the one, that's one of your charging apps that everyone should have, non-Tesla people. Tesla have their own deal, and it works the same way. But you have to buy the Pro, and it's €5 a month, which works out to like $7 Canadian. And I canceled it last time and got a refund for part of the month. So you can use it for your trip and then cancel it, and it's fine. And the Pro version has real-time weather. So before you go, you need to buy a dongle for about $40 Canadian from Amazon. And it needs to be Bluetooth low energy, and that will work with this app. You plug it into the computer diagnostic charge port that every car has. Teslas are a bit different, but every other car has a standardized port. And you plug it in, it connects via Bluetooth to your phone. Your phone knows the data from the car, the temperature of the battery, the actual charge of the battery, the consumption that's going forward, speed, and all that, and gives you extremely accurate readings, okay? And you will know if you can make it to your next destination or not. And a lot of times in a situation where it's cold in winter, on the prairies where there's long distances, it will tell you to slow down. You might have to go 90 kilometers an hour, maybe even slower, but at least it'll tell you that so that you get there, safely. You'll probably have people honking at you and looking at you funny, but on a 2-lane highway, it shouldn't be terrible. So yeah, you need all that. Do it. I admire your desire, but cold weather / using cabin heat from your battery to keep the cabin warm, it's a very tough situation. Dense winter air. There's a lot going against you, and it just may not be possible. I understand, I'll take my time. I'll take an extra day.
Yeah.
But if you can't make it from A to B without going 80 kilometers an hour for 2 hours or something, then it gets scary. But the Better Route Planner Pro with a dongle takes questions out because it is rock solid.
Yeah. And you'd really want to check and see, you'd really want your chargers to be 150 kilometers between charges, maybe even less. And, if the weather gets worse, then, it's all more difficult.
If you are crazy enough to do this, Ian, make a documentary about it and put it on YouTube or something, because I'll watch. But good luck. And I'm sorry, I feel terrible having to say no, but I don't think you should do it. In the summer, jump on the opportunity. You'll have a wonderful time. You won't even have to add an extra day. Maybe you'll add a couple of hours to your day, but it's a different kind of travel, and it's a nice way to go.
You'd probably have to turn your cabin heat way down and just, rely on the heated seats. It would be unpleasant.
People do that, and I don't like it.
Yeah. Okay, more mail. This one is from Chuck. Hey guys, I heard a story on the radio about a Tesla Cybertruck catching fire, the terrorist explosion. Are these things to be concerned about? Well, we did discuss this on a Patreon bonus episode, and our standard line is, of course, that battery electric vehicle fires are a thing, but not nearly as big a thing as combustion vehicle fires. And that particular was, there were literally explosives in the truck that were set to go off. So that's sort of a unique situation. That doesn't really have anything to do with electric vehicles.
Well, we'd love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can always leave us a voicemail online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. Join the conversation on our Patreon page where all our social content is posted, where you can also get access to additional content for joining one of our membership tiers. And that's what Josh, Roger, Weldon, Randy, and Robu did this month. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon.
Okay, so I've got more from Scandinavia. It's Scandinavian week here on the Clean Energy Show. This is from a city called Västerås in Sweden. It kind of sounds like Westeros from Game of Thrones, but it's spelled differently and with a V and with lots of umlauts and things over the letters. But this is a city in Sweden of about 160,000 people. And there's a great video I caught on YouTube from Deutsche Welle, a German public broadcaster. This is the channel that you thought I was talking about last week, but just by coincidence, this is a video from the German public broadcaster Deutsche Welle. And it's a really excellent breakdown of this town, and they use district heating. We cover this occasionally. It's a much more common thing in Europe where whole towns can be heated by a single, furnace, basically. They do it in Yakutsk. We were talking about Yakutsk, one of the coldest cities on Earth. They have district heating and pipes that flow to different buildings. I should have compared
the weather in Yakutsk yesterday to us just to see.
Yes.
Didn't do that.
There's always that weather extreme page that I go to on the internet, and it shows you the coldest places on Earth. And we were probably on that list a couple of days ago. So anyway, in this city, they use cogeneration to make heat and power at the same time. So they are currently burning fossil fuels to do this. They're hoping to eventually go clean. And of course, that's a nice thing about district heating. The actual fuel source is, agnostic. It can really be anything. So they have switched over the years. This power plant was built in the 60s, and it originally just burned oil, and then they switched to coal. They've since switched to, biofuels and other things. But the benefit of cogeneration is if you're burning fossil fuels anyway to create electricity, well, guess what? You're also creating a bunch of heat. And normally that just gets wasted. It's not really used anywhere. We have coal generation around here, and all of that heat is, it's not going anywhere. But you can capture that heat and, use it to heat people's homes. It gets down to about minus 20 in the winter, and I was laughing to myself. That's minus 20 Celsius. That's nothing to James and myself. But anyway, here's a nice little clip here from Deutsche Welle.
This city in Sweden may look unassuming, but somewhere below, something truly extraordinary is hiding. In a secret location, the local energy company built a giant underground thermos. These caves used to store a hidden oil stash during the time of the Cold War. And now they flooded them with water and got it to near boiling point to build one of the largest heat batteries of its kind. Pretty much all houses here, 98% of them, are connected to pipes like these. There's a huge network of 900 kilometers just in this city, and their main purpose is to keep people warm.
During the summer, we need to have the power plant running because everyone wants that hot shower even on a warm summer day.
But to keep the plant running, it needs to produce a minimum amount of hot water, often more than can be used up in the summer. And in winter, it sometimes can't produce enough heat, especially on really frosty days.
When it gets colder, we need to fire up another power plant.
So the idea was simple but ingenious. Why not dust off those big caves they had under the city and turn them into a giant heat battery that can store the extra heat from summer so it can be used to keep houses warm in winter?
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah, underground storage caverns that used to have oil in them during the Cold War. And after the Cold War, they didn't need it anymore, so they cleaned out all the oil, and they literally just put hot boiling water down there in the summer when they're, producing all this electricity, producing all of this heat that they don't need, and you get it to near boiling temperatures, you stuff it underground in these caverns, and it will stay warm until winter when they actually need it.
That's amazing. And yeah. Sometimes people don't want to do things like this, to think outside the box and solve problems this way, but I'm glad they are. Next week, I'm going to have a story for you on why are trees left standing after the wildfires in California when they destroyed all the homes. I was wondering that, and Cal Fire has an interesting explanation. Hoping to get to that to you this week, but we ran out of time. Coming up next is the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Oh, golly, the new U.S. president is ordering the U.S. to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, another retreat in the fight against climate change by the world's wealthiest nation. There is no God. I don't know what's going on in the world, Brian, but the climate hopefully will not suffer. Oregon is getting a 1.2 gigawatt solar farm. In layman's terms, Brian, that's huge. Huge. China, which is set to overtake the U.S. and EU in installed nuclear capacity by 2030. Yeah, that's happening by 2030. It'll be the largest nuclear energy-producing nation in the world. Recycling battery metals could supply 25% of Europe's electric cars by 2030. Already, there would be enough batteries recycled to get 25% of the mining taken away from Europe's cars by 2030. That's coming up pretty fast. It is time for a CS Fast Fact. China produces twice as many vehicles as all of Europe, 3 times as many as America.
Wow.
And almost 4 times as much as Japan. Stanford study, California grid maintained reliability with high renewable penetration. 100% demand was met by wind, water, and solar for parts of 98 days and no blackouts. Because everybody says the grid will be unreliable, but no.
Yes, and California has been known for blackouts, but that problem is getting better.
The recent ruptures of the Baltic undersea cables that we talked about are due not to the Ruskies, but they are actually maritime accidents according to U.S. and a European intel, not foul play. This is from Professor Ray Willis, climate expert on Twitter. Car makers generally focus on bigger markets first. Australian vehicle markets usually lag 12 to 18 months. Australian battery electric vehicle share was 1.7% in 2021, 3.4% in 2022, 7.5% in 2023, and 7.6% in 2024. It's starting to catch up with the rest of the world. It is estimated to be 12% in 2025 and could outsell ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles, as soon as 2027, but not later than 2030. And it's time for another CES Fast Fact, also related to China. China's automaker BYD has 1 million employees globally, Brian, and 102,000 engineers in research and development.
Oh, wow.
Which is basically all of them. Across 11 institutes that produce 32 patents per day. And you wonder, how are you going to compete with that? I would not want to be trying to compete with that. This is from Hoekstra on Twitter. For the fire brigade out there, one EV fire is more labor-intensive than one combustion car fire. Yes, but for every EV fire, the chance of someone dying is actually smaller. And the fires happen less often, 25% less when parked, 50% less in total, implying that some of those fires happen when it's parked. The U.S. Supreme Court of honorable judges, who we all respect and aren't crazy, denied Big Oil's request to move the climate liability cases to the federal level. That means state courts like Hawaii and California will continue to decide on cases that could force Big Oil to pay big for climate damages. Bravo. Thank God for that. One 2014 study estimated that by 2050, 1 million additional houses would be built in very high-risk wildfire zones in California. Already, there are 2 million homes in high and very high-risk wildfire zones in the state. That is from Lever News. The link is there. Global EV sales last year, 25% bigger than the year before. That is a pretty decent growth rate. And I think 29 was the peak after COVID, and people were complaining and saying the bottom's falling out. Well, globally, it's good. China, 40% growth. US and Canada, only 9%, but not nothing. And the EU was down 3% due to subsidy cancellation and other issues in the economy. And finally this week, this is from the Financial Times. Has China already reached peak oil? This is from just 4 days ago. We've mentioned this before, but this is a new report. Is China one of the biggest oil producers on the planet already starting to use less oil? For years, China's hunger for oil has been massive. They've used it to power their cars, built skyscrapers, and run huge factories, but now things are shifting. Last year, China's oil imports actually dropped for the first time in decades, and experts think their total oil use could peak as soon as 2027. Why? First, their economy has slowed down, and construction projects need less fuel. But the bigger change is electric cars. China is the world's leader in electric vehicles, and more people switch to these as them. Less gas and diesel is being sold. And this isn't just a big deal for China, of course. It's a huge deal for the entire planet. If China, their oil use keeps shrinking, it could help reduce pollution and even bring us closer to tackling climate change carbon targets. And it also raises questions of what will happen to countries like Canada that sell oil. I have these questions. I live in Canada. And can other nations like India follow China's lead? I personally, Brian, think that it won't be as fast because they're not a communist nation that just flicks a switch and whatever they want happens. But because of the economics of where they are now that they're making this transition in India, and all these cheap Chinese vehicles are available and getting better with all those engineers, 102,000, 32 patents a day, that's going to affect a lot of places in the world outside of North America. When I say outside of North America, I mean Canada, the United States. Everywhere else, get on board and, electrify your transportation.
All right, that is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. On social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. You can join Patreon for free and get special posts that are not found elsewhere. The link is in your show notes. You can also support with a purchase from the merch store that is also on the notes. And rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember to subscribe wherever you find us.
Thank you again to all our Patreon members who are in the Clean Club Executive. We get to mention those. As a shout out for you guys, Green Bastard, Brent Rutley, and Ryder. First week of the month, we'll probably mention everyone else because we do that once a month. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get access to our exclusive Patreon episodes. That is an extra episode every month just for Patreon. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.